So, a new third force is posing a grave threat to democracy. Well, that's the view of political analyst Sipho Seepe, coming after revelations that former Eskom boss Andre de Ruyter relied on a flawed report for his corruption claims. It was an opinion piece where Seepe says the ANC is also out of ideas and just exists to be in office. The Prof has made time for me this morning. Prof, good morning to you. I hope you had a good weekend. Lots of reaction I see to your opinion piece. Let's first of all start. We'll talk ANC and being a placeholder government, as some people are calling it at the moment. We'll get there in a second. Third force, where's this coming from? Good morning.
Well, I think it's less about a third force, but more about the persistence of the system of apartheid in terms of its architecture. You need to understand that systems have their own internal logic, and that internal logic creates and produces certain habits. And what we see, it's a more a repetition of the old habits. For instance, the issue of de Ruyter deciding to rely on a flawed report coming from a former apartheid spy is an example of the old habits that they do not die easily and have not died. So the issue here, the piece was really that for us to move forward, we need to also destroy the geopolitical imagination of apartheid. And we must also destroy some of the structures that were put in there, because those structures have their own internal logic. And we must also start looking at the behavior. And the argument that the paper article puts is that the ANC inherited that system and has been unable or unwilling to radically transform it. So the issue here is, as if you listen to the ANC speak today, it is more about in government, how it will perform. The whole notion of the revolutionary content about redressing the spatial and imagination spaces of apartheid is no longer part of the discourse. So this is what the piece is all about.
I want to pick up on one of the comments that was made, and other readers of your comment, of your column, Prof, also picked up on this. When you say the ANC unwilling or unable, nearly 30 years in power, do you really think it's a case of unwilling or unable? Do you think it's a combination of both, or is it one or the other? Because 30 years is a long time to, as some would suggest, not get much done.
I think part of it has to do with misconceiving what happened in 1994. What we did not have, even though we call it a breakthrough, it was not a victory. What the apartheid system and architects decided to do was to take a strategic retreat to say, we have a country that is ungovernable, and that apartheid, we must accept it, is unworkable. But the question is, how do we make sure that the privileges that we had are sustained? And you sustain them by making sure that you keep the structures that had actually worked to pursue the apartheid agenda. For instance, if you take the issue of funding of universities, historically black universities were underfunded. And if you look at the budget today, you still find that the funding does not go to historically black universities to level the playing field. The historically white universities still get the billions that the historically black universities are not getting. So this is what the Kara Asmal, before he died, called the geopolitical imagination of apartheid. So for us to move forward, we need to have a proper understanding of that architecture. And we must also understand those structures and those systems and processes that continue to reproduce apartheid spatial imagination. Take the issue of land. 30 years down the line, we have not made progress. Black people still find themselves pariahs in the land of their birth. That cannot be correct. But if you're going to rely on systems and laws and processes that were designed to keep black people out of the land, you'll find yourself where we are today.
Let me ask you this in closing, Prof. A lot of people on social media reacting, to your column, but also to the new mayor of Johannesburg on Friday, just collectively around politics in our country. We're arguably a year away from elections. No election date set, but it's probably going to be around about this time next year. The issue coming in is, of all the issues you just raised, there's a general sense that there really isn't a good enough opposition. Obviously, the DA will put up their hands as the official opposition and say, vote for them. But is there a real alternative for the average South African, with all the issues you just raised, to not vote for the ANC? And probably this is where you could bring in coalitions if you want to, which also are not exactly looking too cheesy at the moment.
Yeah, well, the mere fact that you have coalitions and the fact that the ANC itself has accepted that possibility, it's in itself an acceptance and an indictment on its part that it has lost the plot. A party that is confident would be seen by the continued rise in terms of popularity. Remember, the ANC used to run 9 provinces. And right now, when you talk about Western Cape, it has almost given up taking over that. And we've seen encroachment by other parties into the space that was historically or initially occupied by the ANC. So the fact that you talk about coalitions and we're concerned about coalitions itself is simply saying the people are beginning to think differently. Whether you're going to have enough people, it's something else. But they come into coalitions. The issue that we are also faced with when you talk about the strong opposition is also because black parties or parties that have mushroomed are each pursuing sometimes a single issue campaigns, and which weakens their ability to form a strong opposition. So you could actually say part of the problem is the mushrooming, in as much as some people see it as a maturing of democracy that everybody can stand. But what you end up with doing is that you will get these parties getting 1% there, 2% there, 3% there, and the ANC will continuously gain the majority by default, because these parties, which seem to talk the same language, are not able to find each other. You have people who are too ambitious to be leaders, as opposed to forming a party that will be strong, that will also give the ANC a run for its money. But also the issue of opposition, we initially used to look at it negatively. But the opposition is there also to improve, to ensure that there's improvement in terms of accountability. It is not only opposition that needs to be only oppositional. It also must add into this agenda of creating a new, non-racial, democratic, and prosperous society. But at the moment, everything that we see is failure. And unfortunately for the ruling party, that has struggle credentials. It no longer talks about the importance of having to destroy the apartheid architecture. And you find that our conditions as black people is not any different as it was during apartheid. Yes, there are pretensions that you allow 1 or 2 black people to escape poverty. But in the main, the majority of black people find themselves mired in conditions of abject poverty and a sense of landlessness and hopelessness.
Not the first person I've heard on this channel say that opposition parties can't just be opposing to everything. They actually need to provide the alternative and a solution for South Africans for next year. Prof. Sipho Seepe, always a pleasure talking to you. Great column, by the way. If you didn't get a chance to actually go take a look, please go just Google it. I'm sure you can find it quite easily. Professor Sipho Seepe joining us this morning.